Hello, I thought I would spend our time today talking about a little bit more about the Scopes trial. It is something that I have researched and studied for years. I actually have a book manuscript that I'm hoping to get out before the centenary on the influences that brought about the Scopes trial, and then, of course, how those things have played out since, and with the current, power of evangelical Christianity has politically across the country. When you think about the Scopes trial, you realize that it was far broader than we tend to think of when we discuss such issues like, the evolution versus creation. It tied up in cultural issues. Something happened with all the three monotheistic religions as they came out of World War One. With the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims turn and kind of go back into the past and reject modernity. The Jews will become Zionists looking for a homeland, which is a form of fundamentalism. And then the Christians, of course, will pursue a path of fundamentalism as well. We had rumblings of that before theologically in the late 1800s and early 1900s when very conservative schools like Princeton took positions that made untenable for Bible believing professors to remain there and to teach under their auspices. So people like Gresham Machen will leave and start other seminaries, other churches, other denominations. Interestingly, the Presbyterians seem to be the leader in the theological debate and will up until the early 1900s. And then but the Scopes trial is another nexus. It is the crossroads of the social aspects, religious aspects. It is the populist version of moving into fundamentalism, in which John T. Scopes, who was a first-year teacher in this little town of Dayton, Tennessee, is arrested for breaking the law in Tennessee. It was against the law to teach evolution in the public schools. And so he was arrested. And so just as soon as the trial was announced, these two great titans that you see here, William Jennings Bryan on your right, who was a three-term Democratic populist candidate for president. He had been a Secretary of State. He'd been a number of things, but he was also a very famous fundamentalist leaning Presbyterian Christian, and he debated across the country on the issues of evolution. So he said, I'll come and prosecute Scopes so that once and for all, we'll put an end to this question of origins. Clarence Darrow, who's on the left here, was a notorious agnostic / atheist attorney from Chicago. He had just come off of winning a major trial with blaming the environment for these two boys committing murder and got them off for murder. And he says, well, if he's coming to prosecute, then I'm coming to defend Scopes. I don't have time to talk about all the details. I could talk for hours about this, but I wanted to show you some of the newspaper coverage that was happening across the country at the time. In fact, at the end, my references, there are three of those that we'll talk about. Two of those are newspapers. This is a major media event. This is the first major media event, actually, the new technology of radio, which was originally a ship-to-shore communication for the Navy. There are thousands of people standing by the radio listening to this trial. It's broadcast live. There's over 200 journalists there. They put out 35,000 words a day across the world to people, and the interest in this trial is absolutely phenomenal. It is a major trial of the ages. They realized and knew that Scopes would be convicted in this little town of Tennessee because the jurors were all of the Christian mindset. And so there's a lot of things to be learned. But outside the courtroom, it is a major circus. There are animals in cages. They're selling monkey t-shirts and monkey balloons, if you will. There are fundamentalists preaching, you're going to hell if you believe in evolution type messages. But at the end of the day, even with Scopes convicted and sentenced, the media declared that the evolutionists had won, that this belief in creation was very primitive, backwater. Some little town like Tennessee would be caught up in that, but evolution and science was going to win the day. My point in this presentation is to respond to that question on whether the evolutionists really won or not, even though the media declared that, and even though in subsequent years, attempts have been made to promote that and to bolster that idea, there was a movie in 1955 called Inherit the Wind, which became what the public belief or the public understanding of that history was, but it was completely in error and missed the entire point. So there's a lot of things in our history like that, where some major media event will determine and define the history, but it's not true history. So, but there are some other facts that I think indicate that the creationists really won. John T. Scopes was convicted. He was fined $100 for teaching evolution in the public school. That should be a win for the fundamentalists. The ACLU, which was newly formed and had promised to pay for Scopes's trial if he would be considered, let them consider him as a test case, because they wanted to move this case to the Supreme Court to get a wider ruling so that evolution should be taught across the country in every school. They failed on that score. The Supreme Court of Tennessee overturned Scopes' conviction, returned his fine, and that was the end of it. They never made it to the Supreme Court, so the evolutionists lost there. In a post-Scopes world, Darwin was removed from high school textbooks from 1925 up until 1957, when the Soviets launched Sputnik, and suddenly the United States was behind in science, and the writing of textbooks was returned to college professors. And so Darwin comes back in the 60s in the textbooks after 1960. In that sense, that's a win for the creationists to get rid of Darwin and his teachings. In the post-Scopes world, Christian colleges and universities began to form at a much faster rate. Dallas Seminary, Bob Jones University in Florida, Pensacola, Christian, all across the country, Christian universities began to rise, and two of them in particular. Another victory for the fundamentalists out of this was after 1960 with the return of Darwin. There were two other facts that really influenced them, and that was the Supreme Court ruling that prayer and Bible reading should not be in public schools. They began to form Christian schools across the country by the hundreds. And so the two of those colleges that were formed, Bob Jones University, Pensacola Christian, began publishing large volumes of curriculum to be used in those schools where creationism was taught and evolution was played down. So after 1960, the Christian school movement saw tens of thousands of schools start across the country, and many of you might have been students in those. So those are wins for the creationists. Fundamentalists also were labeled by the media as anti-modern, as we said in the movie Inherit the Wind. They were played down as a bunch of country yokels who didn't believe in science and all this stuff, and yet they latch on to the modern technology of radio in the decades that followed Scopes to win converts and to build their congregations up until as late as 1973, Dr. Falwell with the Moral Majority, which was strictly anti-evolution, would form the moral majority of churches across denominational lines, but he would use TV and radio as the technologies to see so much of that done. And of course, founding of Liberty University falls right into that bailiwick. The three sources that I wanted to share with you, one was a book entitled by Jeffrey Moran called The Scopes Trial, A Brief History in Pictures. I would encourage you to look for these on your subjects. There are several of those out. I have one on the Great Awakening and several others where they put together many of the documents and some photographs and some history, a brief version of that. And this is really a great book. Two newspaper articles that I've used in this, one by Puckett, and it said that in Dayton, evolution is dead. He did this 2 years, 1927, after Dayton. He said that evolution is dead. 2 years after the Scopes trial, the Tennessee mountain town keeps on its even course, although it has new biology books. Remember, I told you they would replace those immediately without Darwin in the schools. They have a site for Bryan University. Evolution is dead in Dayton. And of course, Bryan died in Dayton before he ever left. He died the Sunday after the trial closed. They built Bryan University there, which is to this day a very fundamentalist university, still teaching the fundamentals of the faith. The other one is a special edition that came during the trial of the New York Times. Indictment is sustained. Judge upholds constitutionality of the Tennessee law. State calls for 4 witnesses, puts the Bible into record after showing Scopes taught life originated from one cell, and modernist prayer, what happened in the court is likely they're going to permit juries to hear scientists, and all these are the points that are coming. So these are the little billets down a newspaper that you would have seen in this newspaper extra that was put out. Like I say, major media event, thousands of people watching, and then the events that happened later in the week that really kind of frightened many fundamentalists. Now, we don't have time to go into that, but it left Brian feeling like he had lost the case for Christianity, which probably added to his death on that Sunday when he died of a heart attack or from that. So this is a great story and great event, and I hope you'll spend some time reading and learning more about that in days to come, and find a great point of interest there. Thank you for your time.